Hi folks, we're Tacitus today, your pushback channel. Thank you for joining this radio, audio, no pictures live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about definitions of the working class, or attempt a definition of what is the working class. By extension, I suppose we have to look at what is the middle class. But this came up because some months ago, a British politician, or more than one actually, struggled to define, or couldn't define really, what is working class. And since that sort of time, which was some months ago, numerous media pundits have come up with either their own very half-assed attempt at it, or have lambasted the politicians for not being able to define working class. So let's have a look at this, because it's an interesting subject and goes very much into social history and the evolving social structure of the West, particularly since the Industrial Revolution. Now, there was say in Britain or Europe generally, there was a very sort of substantial dividing line between the aristocracy and the indentured sort of medieval serf peasantry. And you'd say the serf peasantry and were the working class, or what would become the working class in a more sort of diverse economy. But back in the time, in an agricultural economy where there's very little of what we would call today industry. Now, there were still skilled artisans, not many, but they were there, and you would describe them as middle class, I suppose. They weren't aristocrats, but they had particular skills, typically after having served quite long apprenticeships, which was really indentured servitude. And they were again, this very small middle class. Now, people could still say in Britain, for an example, and it was very class-ridden society, they still could rise up as middle class, whether it be in trading or other things, through certain skills. For example, Sir Francis Drake was a commoner, but his skills as a navigator and as a sea captain, on a ship, meant that he could rise up through the social ranks. Now, to some extent, when the Tudor dynasty, this is like Henry VII, Henry VIII, Elizabeth I, when the Tudor dynasty came along, they were largely outsiders, or certainly outsiders as compared to, if you like, the middle mainstream of the aristocrats. And they didn't really trust the entrenched political class. They, to some extent, but they didn't trust the entrenched political class to the extent that the people that are typically populate the hierarchy did. So they were much more prepared to look at what they called the new men. So they were prepared to look at people with ability and capability and skills far more than just aristocratic breeding. And this brought in a new class of people into the upper echelons of British society. And this was very key in changing Britain and Britain's outlook going forward. It actually, I think it's a story that really hasn't been dealt with, given the merit and attention it deserves. I think this was very much a change in the structure of management and, again, social mobility in the hierarchy, in the aristocracy. Even people that weren't necessarily members of the aristocracy but were perceived as people of great skill and capability, they could rise up into positions of prominence. And so on. That didn't mean that the old aristocratic class was completely gone. It wasn't. But new people were able to come in, and it changed the attitude to social mobility, and to social mobility through skills and capability. This was probably the most important thing. And that was, I think, the nascent beginning of what, in England at least, in Britain, was referred to as the middle classes. Now, as time went on, you're looking at people of great skill, like, say, Captain Cook, who was a extremely accomplished navigator, but also a expert cartographer, map maker. And his maps that he drew in the 1700s were still in use in the 1950s, for goodness sake. That's how accurate his maps were. So he became very prominent, and he's something of a legend in certainly British society and amongst British colonies, that sort of thing. His skills as a mariner and a map maker. Now, various others like the people that or the guy that invented the steam engine. This is before engineering was a discipline that we understand today. Invented the steam engine. People who discovered ways of welding and sealing boilers together so they could produce high pressure steam that could drive steam engines and other equipment, pumps to pump out water in mines and all sorts of various applications, industrial and so on. The person who invented the spinning jenny. These were people that had these were accomplishments that came from people of skill, and so this created, and by the time the Industrial Revolution was moving along, this created a separation of the classes. So in Victorian England, as an example, the definition of working class was someone who had their labour to sell, but no particular skills. And so they were working intermittently. This is after people have been moved from the farms and the agricultural pursuits into the cities and now working in factories and industrial employment. So a working class person was effectively a labourer with no skills and no ability to really change their social and economic circumstances. So they weren't able to break out of that loop of intermittent employment, today having a job, but tomorrow not. And this was in the days before full or continuous employment. So particularly with things like, say you've got a factory and you're relying on raw materials coming from, Australia or somewhere. And in those days, the transport was quite unreliable or far less reliable than it is today. So you don't know if the ship with the raw materials is going to turn up. Now, if the ship doesn't turn up, it's lost at sea or it's late, you don't need the workers. So the workers could be unemployed for weeks while they wait for the next ship with the raw materials to come in, that the factory can then process those raw materials and make whatever finished product. So the labourer was in a constant stop-go, stop-start type situation of employment. And it's very hard for them to plan ahead, to borrow money and pay it back. They're a high risk option for any money lender and so on. So their conditions and circumstances are quite poor. In order to share the load, they had to live communally at the time, and something that we're starting to see again today in the cost of living. People are having to live communally because they don't have an option. So you could have a 2-room apartment, 2-room dwelling of some sort, not built to a particularly high standard in some London slum or some factory city slum, and you could have 10 plus people living in those 2 rooms. And the idea was to spread the load. There would always be somebody in that group who would be employed, so they would then share what they had, and that's how they would survive and get by. But their chances of breaking out of that situation or status was fairly slim. So that was really the working class, people selling their labour on an intermittent basis, and they had no skills to sell. Now, the difference is if you have skills to sell, you have a much higher it's not a guarantee, but you have a much higher likelihood of continuous employment. So if you have, if you're an expert map maker, then, you're always going to be in demand. Or if you're a boiler maker, or if you maintain steam engine locomotives, these sorts of things, the chances are you'll always be employed. Now, it may not be a full week or something, but it doesn't matter. So that became the middle class, people who were a working class person with continuous employment based on some sort of skill and knowledge that they had. So that's where the middle class began to separate off from the working class. Now, Middle class today has a, a different definition. It's wealthy people in England, at least. This is, oh, the middle class are running the country. No, they're not. Yeah. The idea is that the middle class is the rich elite who are non-aristocratic. So it's a very traditional British view that goes back into the class structure. But middle class is the, if you look at it more widely, is the ability to change your circumstances through hard work, hard study, and that creates social mobility. So you may be from a working class background, but if you're somewhat bright and you bust your ass at school and university, you could have, in the days when merit counted for something, you could have a meritorious degree in whatever, I don't know, engineering or something, and you could then go out and have continuous employment for your whole life, which will allow you then to borrow money, acquire assets, so on and so on and so forth. Now, times were so good, cost of living, purchasing power times are so good that in 1970, a factory worker could at the lower end could do that. They were still perceived as working class, but they were, able to buy the very basic small 3-bedroom house and, buy a car and have 2.5 children, that sort of thing. But the idea of skilled continuous employment, that became the middle class. Non-skilled, whether it be intermittent or continuous employment, stayed or was still perceived as the working class. But in a place like Australia, the people that would call themselves working class was quite small. There weren't that many, maybe 25% or something. Whereas in Britain, are you working class? 70% may say they were, even though they were leading, in effect, a middle class lifestyle. Say someone who was, say a tradesman. Now you've completed a long apprenticeship, plumber or electrician or something like that. It's a skilled job, so it attracts maybe people with certain. So it's a way for somebody with a working class mindset to transcend that working class status and acquire the flashy gadgets that a middle class person might, but they still have a very working class state of mind where they don't perceive that they actually have social mobility. So another aspect of working class is the perception that they have no social mobility. And why would you want to? Because then the people you grew up with and you may not want to talk to you again because they think you're all hoity-toity and posh or this or that. So that's the separation of the classes. Now, that's now changing again, and probably will continue to change based on the structure of the economy and just the realities of purchasing power or lack of it, as the case may be. So people who are middle class, white middle class, are under a huge amount of pressure all across the West at the moment. And so the idea that you can sell your skills, as which is the definition really of the middle class, you have skills and capabilities and expertise, and you sell those to your employer. That's changing. The idea of the straight white male with skills, if you sell your skills, it's certainly the perception today, at least. If you try and sell your skills into an employer, particularly ones that are afflicted with the woke insanity, then, well, gee, you're a high achiever with self-confidence and self-assurance. That will upset and offend all these affirmative action hires we have. Therefore, we can't employ you, Mr. Straight White, high achieving, high accomplished, well credentialed, straight white male. So anyone that sells their skills is by definition going to be confident and self-assured. That is going to be a threat to our woke affirmative action madness that we've got here. So we won't employ you. And I'm noticing as I go around how many capable straight white males are getting fired. And this is during their probationary periods, fired because I'll go there and meet a straight white male. This is in the business that I've got to share. Meet the straight white male, the capable straight white male, and I think, good, this is in good hands. He's a smart guy. I'm glad we've got someone like that to deal with, and we'll go back a few weeks or a month or whatever later to do another tranche of the work and find the guy's gone. So So I'm always, interested here to check. I'll check with the CEO. He just didn't quite fit in. And well, why was he? Was he doing a bad job? No, he was good at his job. Why was it? Did he grab the ass of the receptionist? No, he's well behaved. Or did he stagger around drunk or something? Like, did he come in and was he tardy? Did he come in late? I mean, did he fuck something up? No, didn't do anything wrong. No, very well dressed. No, well dressed, very well behaved. Look, he did a good job. He just didn't, he just didn't sort of fit in with the, our values, our culture and cultural fit and this sort of stuff. And so, I don't say this because I don't want them to clam up. I want to hear what they have to say. But so you're a perfectly capable, well-credentialed, hardworking guy who's doing a good job, well-behaved, and you decide to fire him because, look, he was just a bit, he was just too confident. He was just too confident. He just kept upsetting, but people were just feeling bad about themselves because there's this really capable guy there, and they're all affirmative action hires. They couldn't push a broom without fucking it up, and so this guy's making them feel bad about themselves, and so they're getting rid of straight white male, capable middle class, what we would call middle class straight white males, on the basis that they're too confident. Fuck, this is where we're at now. So it's actually in reverse, that the so-called confident straight white middle class male is, if this trend continues, will be a dying out species, on the basis that of some obscure notion about woke cultural factors and the like. So that's my take on the middle class and the working class and definitions of it, and maybe that'll help bring some more understanding of the subject. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.